Good day, everyone. My name is Enki, with Ramviki Tefo. Over the years, many long unanswered questions have plagued the community. The lyrics to the 1994 version of Tia being a classic example. But there's also a whole class of related questions pertaining to unidentified songs that the community has been trying to get to the bottom of for years. As the avid fans you are, I'm sure you know the ones. Tiefer gelegt, The Strange Sonne that appeared in 1995, and Zadist. Though that's not all of them, those are certainly the big three. Are these all independent songs, or merely working titles? The overall identity of these tracks has proven to be a rather info-starved subject, but with new sources and a hell of a lot of hindsight, I now have a lot to say about them all. But today, I want to hone in on Zadist specifically, as this one in particular has gotten the community up into a renewed state of interest lately, following mentions of it in recent interviews with Rammstein's longtime producer, Jakob Hellner. But let's not skip to the end. There's a lot we have to cover to put that in context. The story of Zadist begins here, with these notes of synth presets written by Flake. These came with a keyboard of his that was given away in an official contest in 2011. You can see Zadist written at the top. This immediately had fans wondering what this was, but shortly after its appearance, it was strangely quite swiftly forgotten. But what truly cemented Zadist in the collective consciousness of the community came later in 2013, with a setlist from the concert on October 11th, 1996. It shows Zadist as the closing song of the concert. When this image began to make itself known throughout the community, reactions varied. What is this supposed to be? Is this an unknown song? Is this a working title for something we already have? Very quickly then, Zadist became sort of an infamous mystery. Everyone had a different answer. There were those who thought for sure this was a standalone track, but it was also common to believe that it was an early title that referred to anything from Klavier to Bück dich to Eifersucht. For quite a while, my last few sentences were about all there was to say about the song. But eventually, there came a new lead. A 1997 issue of Breakout magazine contained a direct reference to Zadist. This info originally surfaced very soon after the image of the setlist, but for whatever reason, it took much longer to become common knowledge. Translated from German, the relevant portion reads, "In the beginning of January, Rammstein was invited to Berlin by journalists to present excerpts of their new material. Alongside Sehnsucht, which many of you may be familiar with under the name Afrika, they presented Bück dich, alter Mann, Du hast, Spiel mit mir, Bestrafe mich, and Zadist. That last one is still just a working title. The song may be subsequently renamed." This was the point when everyone breathed a sigh of relief. At last, some concrete answers. This narrowed down the options very nicely. Zadist was a song that was later renamed and ended up on Sehnsucht. And we know for certain that it was not Sehnsucht, Bück dich, alter Mann, Du hast, Spiel mit mir, or Bestrafe mich, because these were all listed right alongside it. The article also mentioned Feuerräder by name, so for whatever it's worth, it wasn't some unknown Sehnsucht version of Feuerräder either. So then, of the songs from Sehnsucht, it would have to be either Engel, Tia, Klavier, Eifersucht, or Küss mich. Now came the next phase of speculation. Which song had lyrics that most fit a Zadist theme? Well, the problem was, you could make some sort of valid argument for all of them. And Rammstein working titles don't even necessarily have anything to do with the words. Kinski and Bringer, anybody? Assuming, though, that this was not an example of that, the lyrics would seem to fit Eifersucht the most. But there is immediately a problem with this. Eifersucht is famously one of the songs the band has claimed to have never played live. And Zadist is most well known from a live concert setlist. So how's that supposed to work? But even the band members themselves have been known to get details like this wrong sometimes. But for the purpose of this explanation, let's assume that they remember correctly. This eliminates Eifersucht. 4 options left. Not much new would be learned until late last year, when Jakob Hellner, Rammstein's producer during the time of Zadist, began making the rounds and giving interviews for the 25th anniversary of Herzeleid. 2 interviews are of particular note here. In both of them, Hellner mentions that Zadist existed as a recording during the Herzeleid studio sessions and later ended up on Sehnsucht. Well, fuck. That's a surprise in every way imaginable. Actually, one of these interviews said Zadist was released on Sehnsucht, and the other said the song was released in some form in connection with Sehnsucht. Okay, so our options are back up to 5. Take Eifersucht off the list and add Kokain. However unlikely that may be. Anyway, let's get back to the focus here. Zadist was recorded in 1995. On our list of songs, Engel, Tier, Klavier, Küss mich, and Kokain, I guess, which of them do we know for sure already existed during the time of Herzeleid? Just Tier. And yes, before anyone asks, Sehnsucht Tier and Tier from 1994 are indeed the same song, and I already made an entire video that fully explains how we know that this is true. So, is that it then? Is Zadist Tier? Well, hey there, whoa, not so fast. Sure, we know Tier existed back then, but just because we don't know that any of the other songs are from that era, doesn't mean they aren't. It was still possible that a demo version of, say, Engel existed back then and was called Zadist. At this point, I already strongly believed that Tier was the answer, but in truth, we still can't solve the mystery yet. God damn. But at this point, everyone had pretty much agreed that the only 2 real options for this were Tier and Engel, with Engel having a bit of a majority. But we were going to need more from Hellner before we could put this mystery to bed for good. Which is what I bring you today. I'm not sure yet if the interaction in which Hellner was asked this question has been released. Last I heard of it, it was still forthcoming. Either way, I understand that the question and answer will be edited out simply because they aren't relevant to the overall point of the interaction. But we may put a transcript up on the site if possible. So, Hellner was finally asked directly. There was a song recorded for Herzeleid that you called Zadist, which ended up on Sehnsucht. Which song on Sehnsucht did it become? And then Hellner, without any prompting or hints, answered instantly, Tier. Then the interviewer began to say more, asking if he was sure it wasn't something like Engel, and Hellner said it was definitely Tier because he remembered all the other options having their own separate working titles and themes very early on. Zadist is Tier. Zadist is Tier. Zadist, a song recorded for Herzeleid that ended up on Sehnsucht. Of course it would be fucking Tier. Not just Tier, though. It was originally Tier 94. From a source of my own, I can tell you with certainty that Tia 94 was recorded in the studio at least once in 1995 in demo form. Yes, sing it loud, a Tia 94 studio version 100% exists. And now, allow me to fill in more of the history of early Tia for you. Tia was among the first songs written by the band. To be precise, it was about the 6th. It was played second at nearly every 1994 concert that occurred after it was written, which would have been sometime between April and July. A studio demo version was recorded onto a cassette in 1995. It was rejected from Herzeleid because Jakob Hellner believed the chorus was too weak. In 1996, the band decided to reuse the idea because they did not have enough new material for the next album, because of how little time it had been since Herzeleid. The instrumental was fully replaced with a brand new one, which was originally a standalone idea. So then, follow the logic. 1. Tia 94 became Tia from Sehnsucht. 2. Hellner says that a song recorded in 1995, Sadist, became Tia on Sehnsucht. 3. The 1994 version of Tia is the version that was recorded in 1995. Therefore, Sadist is the original title of Tia 94. Well, most likely, anyway. Technically, we don't know for sure that they called it Sadist when they were playing it live. We only know that they were calling it that since they recorded it in the studio. But I think it is clearly overwhelmingly likely that the band called it Sadist the entire time, just like Bringer and Kinski, which are titles they continued to use for years afterwards. The band continued to call it Sadist until its eventual release, a leftover title from the old version that survived out of habit. My conclusion then. 1995 Sadist, which Hellner mentioned several times, was in fact a studio version of what we have been calling Tia 94, which we will now be calling by its real name, Sadist. But the original setlist picture that started all this, and the mention of Sadist in the 1997 magazine article, what about those? These mentions of Sadist refer to the released version of Tia, or at least to something extremely similar to it, as the early version of Tia had already been rewritten into something almost completely unrecognizable by this point. So, there you have it. One of the longest-lasting Rammstein mysteries is solved by one of the other longest-lasting Rammstein mysteries. What even is life anymore? Congrats to Dr. Flake of Seid Bereit for getting the answer right way back in 2013. And even funnier than that is when you go back to that old set list of presets that Flake wrote, the one with Sadist at the top. If you look closely, this is essentially in the same order as the classic 1997 live setlist, for which Tia was the opener. The answer was here before our eyes this whole time, and 2 years before the story even began for most people. Now that the Sadist mystery has finally come to an end, you can expect a video like this for Tiefer gelegt within the next couple of episodes, if not just the next one. Thank you for letting me share this with you, and take care.